Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of Let's Talk Podcast, a podcast which, or I would say, that makes you think. As always, if you are coming for the first time, our podcast is wholly focused on not providing you the solution, but a way to think. And it can be any diverse topics. As you have seen in the past, we are running for more than 1.5 years. And all thanks to all the viewers and subscribers for providing those motivation to keep us going. That being said, we still, I would say around 75% people haven't subscribed. So please consider subscribing. That not only help us to bring more episodes, more thought-provoking episodes out here, but also bring more quality guests to make sure that all these conversations definitely makes you think and provide your own solutions out there. So that being said, today's conversation is pretty much technology oriented, and it's related to cybersecurity, which most of you are aware. I am actively working on cybersecurity, and that's where our conversation is. So let's get started with three of the, I would say, significant breaches what we have seen in the last 6 months. The first one, which I have, is the dark beam breach, which happened in September 2023. And Darkbeam is a digital risk protection company experiences a significant data breach due to misconfigured Elasticsearch and Kibana interface, exposing staggering, and this is very interesting, 3.8 billion, it's not million, it's a billion records. And most of these records were from the previous breaches collected by Darkbeam to alert the customers to security incidents affecting their personal information. The second one is Move It transfer breach, which happens in June 2023. It's a mass hack of the file transfer tool, Move It, affecting more than 200 organizations, up to 17.5 million individuals. This breach impacted the federal agencies in the US, like Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture, Department of Health and Human Services. And this be a breach, I would say, it says attributed to a vulnerability which was exploited by the Russian ransomware group Clop. The third one is T-Mobile data breach. Yet again, yes. So T-Mobile suffered a second data breach in the May, revealing the PIN, full names, and the phone numbers of 800 customers. And earlier in January, T-Mobile experienced another breach where the personal information includes name, emails, and birthdays of over 37 million customers. Now, if you can imagine, this is only I would say I just handpicked three breaches in the last 6 months in 2023, and there are many more. And these incidents definitely makes you think that how exactly we approach to cybersecurity. And that being said, these incidents with this far-reaching implications sets the perfect stage for our conversation today. First, we are joined by Wes Malaby, currently a senior leader in customer success security at Microsoft. Before joining Microsoft, around 3 years ago, Wes was Chief Information Security Officer at Phillips 66, where he navigated the complex changes of cybersecurity in the energy sector. His journey from a key role in a major corporation to a leading position in Microsoft provides a unique perspective on cybersecurity strategies in these diverse environments. Alongside Wes, we have Omar Turner, a Northeast security leader at Microsoft, who brings a wealth of knowledge from his time at ENY or EY now before his transition to Microsoft. Omar's extensive experience in consulting and his role offer a panoramic view of cybersecurity, understanding the evolving threats of how leaders are responding in this dynamic landscape. So in today's episode, we aim to explore the current challenges faced by CISOs, shifting dynamics in cybersecurity, and provide some experts' insights and practical advice from both the seasoned professionals and those to the new to the field. So let's dive in. Wes and Omar, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for accepting my request here.
Okay, thanks for the invite and the introduction. So we're looking forward to the discussion.
Yep, glad
Perfect.
to be
That's
here.
great. Yes, yes, definitely. Maybe I'll start, Wes, with you. In your experience as a CISO, and let me know whatever, if I have mentioned you need some update, if or not, in terms of your introduction. But in your experience as a CISO here, uh, how exactly you have seen the nature and the complexity of the cyber threat evolve over the period of time, being so much dynamic in nature?
Yeah, that's it's a good point. And no, I mean I think you nailed my past. I spent 20 years in the oil and gas industry. Really in the variety of roles, something that helped me shape my experience when I was a CISO. So in that the different roles that I held included marketing, a lot in IT specifically in the network space. I was a business partner for Midstream, which is a subdivision within the energy sector. And the common thread that I always had was, how do you secure this data, right? And I think you saw security, you saw IT evolve over the last 20 years from fixed asset data centers. Like every company had a data center, multiple data centers. And with the cloud, the introduction of the cloud, you started to see some of that bare metal shift from a management perspective for good reasons. And then you saw data follow. And where the pandemic was up is obviously the inflection point for that. That now you have to secure that data that's company specific from any device, from any place in the world, and validate that the user was supposed to have it, right? And so
Mhm.
the any CISO that hadn't done a proper tabletop exercise in 2020 received one up close and personal, right? And so we'll look back on this years from now and think about how the global pandemic changed the approach to cybersecurity. um, I always used to say that the cybersecurity landscape is always evolving. And anytime I talked to the board of directors, that was my first statement. I wanted them to know you could never sit still. The job was never done. It's an overused statement by CISOs in it, but it's an important one to repeat and make sure that it is very clearly understood. Um, the second one was, security is hard. the Even if you're able to explain what the your stakeholder is seeing, explaining it in terms that they understand forces you to simplify the narrative. And so someone that's practiced at that and able to transfer it into elementary terms may make cybersecurity simple to understand. But we know as practitioners that it's not the case. Microsoft actually has an asset called the Cybersecurity Reference Architecture, and there's 200 slides that sit behind that. And I've presented that to customers, have had discussions, and anyone that sees that for the first time, even if they're a security professional, they're like, whoa. And it's because it does a good job of putting it on a page and demonstrating how ridiculous, if I'm allowed, to say that trying to secure it is. The third thing is that this is one of my other favorite overused sayings, is that cybersecurity forces you to sweep the corners. And you have to focus on basic security first before you get to fancy security. And you talked about one of the recent breaches in your opening, and misconfiguration. I mean, misconfiguration is sweeping the corners. I mean, that stuff happens, but you have to have checks and balances to make that real. Um, that's far different than having a sophisticated nation state enter your network and live there off the land for 6 months, harvesting data, IP, before you discover them and then try to neutralize the damage, right? And so you have to position that in a couple of different ways. So all of that is to say, I didn't really give you any specific examples of where the actual subject matter is there, but I think the commonality is the asymmetry of a defender versus an attacker is
Mhm.
with us. And zero trust, it's a fairly new concept in thinking about how to secure that. Artificial intelligence, the power of AI in defending and attacking companies is going to be top of mind. I know it's a topic that we will definitely get into.
Oh, yes. Definitely. So thanks a lot for providing that. So I have one follow-up question. So as you mentioned that uh, you touch upon different aspects about the technology, the data security, talking to the stakeholders like the people who may not have the technical background. They talk business more. They talk
Mhm.
about risk analysis on a higher level. Uh, so as a CISO, it seems like that person has a right blend of the business understanding as well as the technology. And because CISO is relatively a new field, like
Yeah,
maybe 10, 15 years into the foray, a lot of people move from technology background.
yeah.
What's your perspective? Like you might have moved from that as well. In terms of talking to the technical people, okay, that's fine. We need these things and this is important.
Yeah.
Do you see that over the period of time in your conversation, maybe in your earlier life, that for the board of directors, it was one of the greatest tasks. Like when you say that we need money
Hmm.
to enhance our security, and that security is mostly about a kind of a cost center. It's not like directly giving you a kind of revenue from the business perspective. So for the people who are looking into that, what's your advice? Like how exactly you navigate those tough waters?
Yeah. Yeah. In your question, you framed it really well. I became CISO in 2018. No one slid across a playbook across my desk. There's no this is how you do this, and there was a hell of a lot of on the job training. Having building a network and expanding your network was critical for me. Was to have trusted advisors that had been in this role. I sought out CISOs that not only from the energy sector, but think about in 2018 from a privacy perspective where GDPR was in its adoption phase, and I worked for a multinational company that we had to think about the European aspects of it, but then California following on suit, how you
Mhm.
position that. Deloitte has a slide, and it describes what you just said. That they put the disciplines that a CISO has to practice into four quadrants. And I might get them wrong. I think there's certainly a technologist. That's one. There's a strategy or a strategist, um, which is different than the third one was an advisor, and then the last one was a defender or guardian or something to that space. And so a modern CISO has to wear all four of those hats, and they have to be able to navigate it. What I did was surround myself with people that were much smarter than I and were focused on these different elements of it. And then we wanted to tell stories, right? Being a CISO was the most critical skill was being able to tell an effective story in order to influence folks. And the balance of the technical infrastructure, the IT side of it, understanding your business. Every CISO has to understand the business. You talked about it being a cost center. One of my taglines was we are preserving the revenue for the company. And being part of enterprise risk management and talking to an audit and finance committee, you understand the materiality of a cyber breach upon the bottom line. And the first thing you do is say, how can I keep this revenue and these operating dollars within the company so that we can be successful? Supply chain. I mean, I think about the world's very small, and right now, there's very few companies that aren't dependent upon the security of an upstream or downstream B2B, B2C partner to where there's data that's exchanged. So you have to think about ways to creatively extend beyond that into your supply chain. And then, of course, privacy, I think, is privacy comes and goes as a hot topic. It's back with
Mhm.
us again because of AI, first and foremost. And so, to give a little bit of guidance and think about this, fortunately now, the major universities have cybersecurity programs. There's a ton of postgraduate opportunities to go into that space. I know plenty of colleagues that that are middle to late career that are going back and they're doing postgraduate work. Others are teaching it, right, and they're creating these things. So it's a
Yeah.
fantastic to see that evolution for a fairly immature role within the space.
That's great. So basically, in kind of, if I can paraphrase, you're saying that obviously we need some business acumen. We have to surround ourselves with people smarter than us so that when in need, we can try to bring them together to provide a compelling story. And that is a fabulous point, and a good segue to go to Omar. So Omar, you mentioned, I mean, not you, sorry, Wes mentioned about the storytelling approach. Now, from Wes' perspective, he is reaching out to the board of directors and other executives to ensure that his story is compelling and makes sense. Now, from your side, when you talk to a lot of CISOs out here, I'm sure that you are not only talking about technical jargons, you are also coming back with some stories and makes them think. So, what's your perspective? Do you have a similar approach of storytelling or anything you can provide? That what's your approach to reaching out to the CISOs and where they are at this point?
No, that's a very good question, and I really liked all of Wes's points. I'm going to say three phrases, and I think it's so appropriate for this time period. One is, may you live in interesting times. Another one is, we are in a brave new world. And I think when historians look back at this phase of, life in the 21st century with our digital transformation and AI, people are going to say it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And I say those things because what we're trying to do is really hard. Cybersecurity, it's relatively new. Yes, you had data centers being protected by, access control lists and Cisco routers and data centers and things like that. But the dynamics, the threat landscape is so challenging. And I'm not even starting to talk about AI and quantum security, quantum cryptography yet, quantum computers. So the CISO's role is very, very, very challenging. Anyone in security has a very big challenge. What I like to do when I talk to CISOs is really understand what is their hierarchy of needs, right? Because CISOs come from different places. I've talked to CISOs who were finance people. I've talked to CISOs who were IT people or legal people. Speaking the cybersecurity jargon isn't going to really move them in a certain direction. So you really have to understand, what is the common framework, and it's usually storytelling. It's talking about risk. It's talking about what challenges they have. It's very, very, very interesting. I think there's a couple of different ways to do that. One thing you don't do is try to push a solution or just talk about this is a solution at the right price. It's really about how do you align their strategy with what you are there to consult on. And I think that's just a very, very important step. There's a lot on CISOs' minds. And I'll use another quote. I know I'm kind of quote heavy here. Is it seems that CISOs right now, especially a lot of the SEC changes, a lot of the responsibilities they really have now that they haven't really had in the past, it's as if they have all of the responsibility and none of the power. And that's kind of an inverse of, with great power comes great responsibility. It's kind of the inverse for CISOs to a certain extent, especially where they roll up in an organization. So all that is to say, it's really important to understand the mindset, hierarchy of needs, and that's the fundamental challenges that CISOs really have. It's a
That's
very,
a great point.
very, very important
That's
thing to understand.
Yep. I think a few things stood out as you mentioned the hierarchy of needs, which reminds me the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is
That's,
that
yep.
that's what you are pointing?
Yep.
I think that's something which is very important, not only in the technology but as a human aspects. That what people are looking for before even deciding on subsequent decisions in their life, in different walks of life. And so, as you mentioned about the CISOs, you try to understand from where they're coming from and not talking about technical jargons, more storytelling. How exactly kind of prepare, not getting into the details, but like there are a lot of people who have a cookie cutter approach. Oh, okay, I have a solution. I reach out to the CISOs, I ask certain questions, and then try to pitch in the solutions. However, there are a lot of nuances because CISOs, not all the CISOs are 100% business or technical. Some people, some CISOs, based on my experience as well, get into a vulnerable rabbit hole of technology and planning, and they just miss out the strategy path, like the North Star and all those things. So, The people who are listening here and trying to reach out to the CISOs, what's your initial maybe 1, 2, 3 steps or game plan before even try to get into the details?
Yeah, and I'm curious what Wes's thoughts are as a former CISO, because I'm sure there are a myriad of vendors that were probably trying to reach out to him, selling the perfect silver bullet. And if you go to RSA, you see all these different technology companies, vendors. We would have no security problems if they
Yeah.
all did what they said they were going to do. Look, I think I'll just make a controversial statement.
Mhm.
I don't think CISOs like being sold to. I think they have to. CISOs want a trusted partner, a trusted advisor. They want to understand that you understand what will make them effective and successful in their job and really not get fired. I think that's just the perfect, I think, perspective that I can anytime I'm going into a conversation with a CISO, that's top of mind for me. Because if I was a CISO in 2023, those are the things I'd be caring about. Can the person I'm talking to, do they really understand my business? They understand my technology, they understand my pain points, and they understand from a kind of a multi-dimensional perspective of where I fit in the role, where I am, how I'm doing, what relationship I have with the CISO, CTO, CIO, CFO, the
Mhm.
board. That extra dimension of understanding is what would really, really uh, be helpful. Because otherwise, you're just another person with another slide deck with a SKU and a price point, and that's a race to the bottom. Everyone's doing that, so you have to be creative, and you have to really come from a point of understanding. You're there to really understand the challenges, and you may not have the right solution right then and there, but if you form the right relationships, that is a bond that I think will last more than a couple of quarters in the sales cycle.
Oh,
Right.
yes.
So that's
Yes.
that's the ultimate goal, and that's my perspective generally.
That's great point. Actually, you really, I mean, you touched upon again that human aspects as well. That no one wants to be sold to, but everyone wants to buy or
Yeah.
own. So it's a typical sales thing, and so yeah, I think Wes, what's your perspective that there are so many vendors coming in and they provide you all the bells and whistles,
Yeah.
and this is the best of the breed products. Now, CISO thinking about where to go and what is the best for the organization. So, do you choose budget, money, features, or what a CISO's mind goes through when people pitch in those solutions?
Yeah, and Omar hit the nail on the head. Is that, and I don't think it's a controversial statement. Like CISOs don't want to be sold to. I mean, I think the same thing truly is there for CIOs as well. I mean, I think
Mhm.
generally just people that are making investment decisions that have zeros on the end of it, they want to feel like there's a relationship. And anytime that there's a software, hardware, services provider, the most successful relationship is the one that's based on a two-way trust. And if you're in a for-profit company and you recognize that you're spending investment dollars on a product, that you want that company to have solvency, you want them to be successful, and so you're trying to figure out how to have that fair deal. And to Omar's point about the race to the bottom, buying the cheapest solution may be the right outcome, and it may not be. And so I depended upon a couple of things. Like the first one was another overused statement, but that when you think about the technology world, you can boil it down to people, process, and product. And I put them in that order on purpose. Whether or not you're insourced, nearshored, offshored, completely outsourced, the people that are doing the work that's still your secret weapon, right? Those are the folks that you're investing in some manner to know how your business runs and know how to make decisions in the moment. If you're empowering them to make technical or business decisions, you want them to make the right ones. And so you have to have that balance right first, and you can change it. That's right. You need to. You can't stand by. But so if I'm buying a piece of software, that I'm like, what is going to be the emotional response from my team when they start to use this? Do I have the right training in place? Do they have, the chance to be involved in a feedback network? A cab would be great, are there conferences aspects, but talking to other people that are using it is critical. So what's how long have they been around? Are they a startup that's just 6 months past their stage 2 funding, or have they been established and they have a clear development cycle? The processes within the customer can kind of skip that, but then product. My viewpoint too is that I can very quickly, whether it be Gartner Magic Quadrant, whether it be Forrester, Peer CISO Network, something. If I'm about to make a purchase, then I'm going to get a top 3 of tools. And what you find out is that the parity among that top 3 is pretty consistent. And if not, you're going to rule that out and then replace that with a different tool. So, if I'm looking for cloud security, I'm going to pick 3 tools and be like, okay, this is where I'm going to go. At that point, I'm back to my first 2 columns and saying, do I have the people part of this right? And how much process evolution am I have to go through in order to fit this into my network, right? So I had actually had a sales rep from one company that knew parts of my business better than I did. And that built trust instantly, because they weren't just in security sales. They had other parts of, they worked for a company that sold a lot of different things. And I knew that if they were talking to one of my business leaders, that I could trust that they were not going to embarrass the security relationship into that aspect of it. And I actually would pre-position them because of that, right? It'd be like, because them making the point on my behalf sometimes was more powerful than me doing that. That was my definition of a trusted security vendor at that point. Is that, and they'd done the homework. They reached in, they didn't just go to the website and know what the revenue was or where we operated. They'd gone to the level to understand, what where business development dollars were going in, what that project meant for technology, how I was going to have to secure that coming forward. And it made for a great relationship.
That's an amazing point about what you mentioned, is that they know business more than you, which gives me a thought and maybe a question to Omar. Is that something you or your team, or as a mentor, you suggest do an extensive research, so that when you try to provide those story, try to have those anecdotal experience or something which relates to their business? It's not like you have a generic speech to the customer, rather than more tailor-made, which shows that your intention and you are disciplined in terms of reaching out to the customer and did your homework.
No, I think it's essential, but I would also say you don't need to be like an FBI profiler either, right? I mean, you have to
Yes.
just have a understanding of the individual, where they are in the organization, where they are in the organization in their digital transformation journey. It's another industry buzzword. What their organization is like. How do they look at security? Where what is the organizational hierarchy? I mean, all those things go into it. And anytime you're telling a story, yes, the story is good, but you also need data points to back up points that you're making in the story. So any story, you're putting them on a journey, and you have data points that back up certain key points in that story. That's what someone needs to really. You just need to do your research. So that's my recommendation. It's not easy, and I've seen. I've been in security sales for about 20 years, going back and forth to technology and then security sales, and you just can't join a meeting and ask common 101 questions in that meeting. That never goes well. It just shows you haven't done your research and you're just acting like another vendor. I mean, you really need to do your due diligence. And I think probably from Wes's perspective, you probably would say, yeah, this person took the time to really understand me and my needs, as opposed to relying on a pre-canned talk track from the
Yes.
company. So I think that's just really important. You have to do that all the time. It's not easy, but nothing worthwhile really is easy, right?
Oh, yes. I think you have put in a very important point about it's not only about the stories but data points, and you also mentioned about asking those right questions at the start, like what's your perspective about security? Because I think in my experience also, if the conversation starts like, yeah, security is good, but that is not our priority, then your conversation would be different. But if the CISOs are like, yes, and then if you ask maybe like more questions about open-ended questions, what you have done so far, it also shows what they have already done. And based on that, your conversation can go versus starting pretty basic about why security is important. Now, the question is maybe again, Omar, to you is do you have those experiences where for the CISOs or any of those leadership position people in the security, you have to really pitch in why security is important? Are you still seeing that? That's what the yesterday is, or the things are changing? What's your perspective?
Well, I think that if you have to make that argument, I'm kind of concerned if they should be the CISO. Look, CISO,
But
security,
they are, yes.
security.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, security is. Let's just take a step back. When you
Mhm.
say security, or what are we talking about? There's so many different subcategories of security, and so what I have observed is that depending on the knowledge, interests, or focus of a CISO, will determine what path we go down. If it's somebody concerned about, they have a mandate, they've got to follow zero trust because somebody saw something in the Wall Street Journal, they're going to have that mindset. If it's a data protection and data privacy focus, they're going to have to be really obsessed about the data that they have as an organization, how that interacts with privacy concerns, or even in a data breach. I mean, a lot of the data breaches, maybe if they knew where all the data was, you'd have less of an impactful breach, right? Because you'd put mitigation and other controls on top of it. What about organizations who are so far ahead in a development stack that container security and API security is top of mind for them as opposed to focusing on cloud native SIMs? I mean, so the conversation you have based on the CISO in the company that exists will ultimately determine the talk track that you focus on. But yes,
Mhm.
security in general is great, but you have to almost sometimes have a sub niche and just dive in and double click on certain areas because that's going to be they're going to be they're going to have their budget focused on and their immediate concerns or
Yeah.
their talent shortage, right? So I mean, there's all those. Again, it's a multi-dimensional conversation, and if you can have that conversation and show that you are aligning to their strategic needs, that is where a good conversation can happen.
Great. Yes. So from your cue, as you mentioned that, yeah, sometimes you have to double click and start working on some specifics and maybe
Yeah.
expand. So Wes, from your perspective, if we double click on zero trust, now from zero trust, one of the most challenging thing which I have seen from CISOs as well is, okay, zero trust becomes a buzzword, but when
Mm.
we talk about getting into the implication or implementation rather, there are a lot of nuances, and one of the thing is cross departmental collaborations. Like you are not like it's your baby and then you're doing under the ID. Now it's like you have to do a technical part, you have to have a negotiation skills, you have to understand the human aspirations, why people would like to work with you, what they are letting things go, what would be a long term vision, and a lot of things comes underneath in zero trust. So if you discuss zero trust as a CISO, what's your perspective? How would you like kind of go through certain steps out there?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's funny is that I think about the popularity of the term when 5 years ago, 4 years ago, whereas it is now. And the first thing that I had to do was to help convince folks, or at least be part of the discussion, to say we're not sacrificing the investment that we made using layered defense, right? Like, so we're doing this cloud migration, we're putting mission critical applications into the cloud. It requires us to think differently in how to secure them, where we're going to spend money to do that space. And that's so for me, that's where it started to anchor in with zero trust. And you also saw, as I was saying earlier, you started to see data move more prevalently, and that was the power of why this is an evolution of layered defense. Is you don't have 25 years ago, to get to that data, you had to go into a physical office. You had to log into a terminal or a machine. The data was in the data center, some wires, right? The moat secure perimeter security was top of mind, that sort of thing. Now, again, any device, anywhere, at any time. If you break the principles of zero trust down and you get people, some people also have like a visceral reaction, like especially if you go in and say, hey, assume breach. If somebody's not ready to know what to accept that, then you've got to figure out the right way to introduce that. So there can be barriers of interest for zero trust before you even get to the execution, which I think is where the root of your question was. To get to the execution side of it, like ZTNA for me is important. And that was a good first step into that space because identity is the foundation of security. And when you think about like a company that's ready to start embracing a passwordless or at least minimizing the importance of passwords in their authentication strategy, you've got to prepare yourself for that. You have to prepare your systems. You have to make sure you understand where the data is going. And then the biggest challenge is you got to get your user base ready to go on that journey with you. I'll tell you, one of the things that I experienced in my former life was the retirement package and what kind of phone were retirees predominantly had. Could they do MFA? And so you had to set your lowest common denominator based on the technology to enter the situation there, and then have a time box to say, how long are we going to let that go before we no longer allow an SMS push being the only way that we do MFA, right? And so it's a driver. I guess to summarize my point, I think about zero trust as a vehicle to have the conversation. The fact that it is a marketing buzzword helps people kind of like step back and be like, okay, let's figure out what this is. Let's figure out how to step into what this means for us, and then let's have a plan of action to measure it quantifiably. I don't think for a CISO it's any different at that point. They're going to make an investment decision. They're going to put in a project plan. They're going to change the way that they do things, and then hopefully have a statistical measure that helps them on that journey, whether it be something like the NIST framework or a comparison, so that they can show progress of that investment and the success of that investment for that strategy.
Yep. I think, showing the progress, as you mentioned, it's important because Rome was not built in a day. So it's going to take some time, right intention, and showing that the progress, apart from what you mentioned about showing the value proposition to the team, it's not a marketing word. It really makes a difference. And that's what the CISO comes a pretty critical position, because they are trying to tie in all the other people who have their own vested interest to make their department showing green and always in a flourishing and flying colors. So sometimes it does happen that they have to take a hit in order to have like 2 or 4 more steps. And I think this is one of the thing in Satya's hit refresh. He mentioned about like how he cultivated the cloud business back in the day, and how he kind of reach out to the people where they're thinking that cloud is just a subset, and that may not go one of the most, I would say, pivotal business for for the company. So that being said, one more thing about from the CISO perspective, Wes, in these so much dynamic situations when the worlds of like maybe Omar and other folks out there reaching out and providing some guidance out there, and then at the same time you're having these breaches, as I started with, these are pretty pressured situation out there. So for the people who are in the CISO role at this time, and instead of firefighting are always in a reactive phase, which they have to sometime, what's your advice? Like, what is the thing they start working on it to make sure that they are not so much overwhelmed that not only it impacts their health or their career and whatever, because this is not an easy role. It's not like just do it and then done and proceed. It's as you started, that's a constant battle. So as a warrior, what's your perspective? And then maybe I'll reach out to Omar, what consultation he provides to CISOs.
It's you take it to the human element. I'll tell you, if I can summarize an anecdote that I heard from a CISO at a major finance company. They were talking about the fact of like bank security. If a bad guy goes into a bank with a gun and they walk out with a stack of cash, no one looks at the security officer and says that's the first person that should be fired, right? They're like, bad guy came in with a gun. Thankfully, no one was harmed, and there's a simple insurance there for that. However, if there's a cyber breach that leads to an exposure to consumer accounts, the CISO's job, the career, some of the people in the team, that never leaves them, right? And so hopefully that's something that evolves. And I think about people ask me, would I go back into that role? I loved it. I slept like a baby, and it's because very early on I realized, like, you have to put yourself in a mindset to understand and to trust. Like, bad stuff's going to happen. You're going to get through it. And to be able to, if the absolute worst thing had happened and something that my team had done or that I had done that led to something, then, I'll face that music. I had to have a mental discussion with myself to get into that element. After that, it became really fun because you get to work with cutting edge technology. You get to hire. Omar talked about the hiring shortage. So like it was fun going out there and hiring brilliant minds to come in to solve really technically complex problems. Every single Monday brought a new challenge that you hadn't thought about. And so the way that I'm wired, that motivated me to do my best. And so that part of it was great. The last thing I'll mention is that, this industry has a certain reputation, sometimes well-deserved, for gatekeeping. And so I think what the most important part is getting diverse viewpoints. So a CISO needs to go look for diverse experience, diverse people, diverse viewpoints, and piece that together so that they're constantly evolving this thing in the right direction. The worst thing you can do is rely on what made you successful yesterday in the role.
That's so right, actually. Omar, what's your view in that perspective in these pressure conditions? When you reach out to the CISOs, maybe they can look into just another vendor or just another consultant. What's your how you deal with them then when they are totally overwhelmed with these things? What's your suggestions or perspective on that?
Yeah, I'm going to have another play on a phrase. You said Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah.
Rome wasn't burned in a day, right?
Wow,
I
yes.
think you have
Excellent. Yes.
multiple events over a series of time that cause bad things to happen, either lack of planning, lack of the right resources at the right time. So it's really important to understand that. I think going into a situation, it's not easy when a breach happens, but that's the goal of any trusted advisor or partner, is to help them along that journey. I'm sure, like Wes, you mentioned, you probably had certain vendors or consultants that you could just talk about an idea or a concept of how to improve performance, how to improve observability. And there was no sales goal really at that time. You're having a conversation, you're spitballing ideas, maybe even whiteboarding. I think those are the things that can happen consistently with a vendor or multiple vendors or multiple partners. So that way you're getting an outside view to how to solve these tough challenges. And the challenges are tough. And I think we do CISOs of this industry a disservice to think that these aren't really tough challenges. And I don't know if you're going to talk about AI at some point, but we've exponentially grown the capability of people to do more than they could, right? And then what is the next iteration of that from a technology perspective? Quantum computing can do that even further. Or if you're combining quantum computing and AI, that's a whole other set of challenges. So, but what will help in that is having the right processes, the right people, the right partnerships internally and externally. That is how, I guess, a CISO or any organization can really meet the new world
Yes.
that we have here.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think AI, I would love to, but obviously these maybe some other time. AI itself is a big topic. I did have some conversation with some previous guests, and it took more than an hour. So there are a lot of things to consider. But definitely, I would love, but because of the scarcity of the time, I would say that uh, all the points which we have discussed is really important. And one of the things which I always mention is cybersecurity is not your like Wes or Omar's or Saurabh's responsibility. It's a social responsibility, and everyone has to come up. Don't kind of throw people under the bus. Maybe like executives from security, like as Wes you mentioned that they are the first heads to roll, and those kind of things. We really have to work together as a team, and that's where not only the cybersecurity but the the true teamwork and the human spirit shines. So that being said, quickly, any last word from Wes and Omar, which we haven't covered before we wrap it up?
For my part, I'll say thank you for having the discussion. I think these are important. I always encourage people that are getting into cybersecurity, or if they're adjacent and they're trying to reinvent themselves in some way, is to read, write, and talk. And so, read is make yourself smart on books, and that actually has watch now, YouTube, podcasts, whether video or audio. Like, take in information. That makes you so much better at this industry. Writing is an aspect of storyteller. Like I've gone so far as to encourage people, like, be involved in theater, like find ways to improve that. If you find yourself in that role to where you're having to tell stories to convince people how to do something. And then the last one is just around networks. Like, build a network, but don't fill it up with people that think like you and that come from the same backgrounds. Like purposely put yourself out there when you go to a conference and talk to people that have opinions that you find to be controversial, because you will always walk away and learn something from that. So for my half, thank you, Sarah, for inviting us for the discussion.
Hey, definitely. And network is your net worth, what we say. So Omar, last words.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to go back to the previous topic real quick. I think CISOs, people in security, I don't think we should be afraid to fail at something, because if you're not failing, you're not trying. And if you're not trying, you're not learning. So that's something important. Having that no failure, no breaches, no events. Yes, breaches are going to happen, but it's what you do and what you learn from it. That's the important thing. And one thing about cybersecurity, I want everyone to be in cybersecurity. I personally believe that, you don't really have to be, you don't have to be a data scientist or a computer scientist or a mathematics person. You have to be somebody who really loves solving problems and really curious. That's all you need. There's a wealth of ways to train and learn. And, I don't think that should stop anyone. If people knew the industry, people may be in another industry. I'll just say this. I think that cybersecurity is one of those events in a generation that this is something that can take people into the middle class. I don't think we talk about that enough. Learning, I mean, the pay rate as well is pretty good. And if you're creative, if you love learning, I think you have everything open to you to really be successful in a career that not only does good, but helps, your career path. So jump in, join us.
That's great. That's great. Jump in and join us. So that's a great line to end our today's conversation. And thank you so much, gentlemen, for providing your time and your insights. Looking forward for more such conversations in the future. And I would say, have a wonderful day. Happy New Year if we do not meet. And thank you so much for your time again.
Stay safe.
Yeah.